lounging, son.
Welcome back to the Comic Lounge. My name's Ryan, and with me today, I have an absolute legend of the comic industry. I have Mr. Jim Shooter with me, DC, Marvel, Valiant, Defiant, editor-in-chief. I mean, there's Legion of Superheroes, Secret Wars, so much stuff you've done. So I'm so excited to have you on, sir.
I'm glad to be here. Thank you.
So I always ask this question, because sometimes I get different answers. I like to know, like, kind of what started your love for the comic book medium.
Well, when I was a little kid, comics were everywhere. It was in the 50s. And I loved to read. And I loved comics. Got bored with them. I was about 8 years old because they started seeming... I kind of outgrown the Ducks. And there were very few superhero books, and they all seemed kind of the same. So I gave up on them for a while, but rediscovered them when I was 12 years old. And that's when these newfangled Marvel comics came out. Boy, they were good. So it got me interested again.
And I mean, that's 12. So 13, I believe you were, right, when you wrote your first comic book professionally.
Yes.
I'd love to hear a little bit about that story and how that took place.
Well, I mean, my family was not well off. Well, we needed money. My father was the hardest working man in the world, but it was tough to make ends meet back in those days when you were a steel worker. So what can you do if you're 13 years old? They're not going to hire you at a factory or give you any good job. So I thought, well, I got to make something and sell it. And I loved comics, and I thought somebody must get paid for this, And so I didn't know what a script looked like, so I made it look as much like a comic book as I could. My drawings weren't great. I was 13. I was an art school kid, but I wasn't, professional quality. But I drew every panel, and I lettered in the word balloons, wrote a story, made a cover for it, and I colored the cover because I wanted them to know exactly what I wanted, So anyway, I got a letter back saying, send us another one. So I did. Sent them 2 more. And then I got a call from the editor there, Mort Weisinger, head editor or vice president, big shot. He said that he wanted to hire me as a regular writer, and that from now on he would give me assignments. And he gave me my first assignment that day. It was he said, Supergirl, 12 pages next Friday. Okay. so I did, and it's an action comic, so made the cut.
Yeah, I mean, it's just crazy to hear. I mean, that's got to be the record, right, for the youngest person to ever be published.
People told me that for a long time, but then I was talking to Joe Hubert one time, who was the most gentlemanly and a nice guy I ever met. And Joe told me that he was working in a studio, and they let him do some backgrounds or inking when he was 12. I said, "Holy cow!" I said, "That's the new world record," And Joe, who, like I said, is very gentlemanly. He says nice things, whether you deserve them or not. He said to me, he said, "Well, the difference is you were good." I don't care if it's a total lie. That made my week. I was like, I was so happy. Anyway, it is wrong. I mean, Joe was tremendous from the beginning, but what a nice man. What a great guy. I got to know him pretty well, and he was always the most gentlemanly guy.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. Look, he started a cartooning school, for comics. I mean, huge in the industry. So, what about Legion kind of drew you to write those characters? And I mean, you created several new members during your tenure writing them.
Yeah, well, first of all, I read the Marvel comics, and I thought there's no way I can write well enough to be, as good as this Stan Lee guy. But I thought there were some DC comics that seemed to have tremendous potential, but they weren't really exploiting, and I thought of those Legion of Superheroes, young heroes in the future, had tremendous potential. And the stories were, they were kind of old-fashioned. They weren't, really turning me on. So I thought, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to work on stories for that because, the concept excited me. And I thought might be able to make a difference with the stories. So I did, and apparently, like I said, I made the cut, and that became my regular monthly title. I also did all the other Superman family books here and there, but Legion was great because it was my regular monthly title, And I asked my editor about continuity, and he said, we don't do that. And I thought, and I figured it out. I mean, basically, since they had different people writing Superman, Superboy, all those characters, no, you didn't want to burden your other writers with something that they had to take into account in their stories, and they didn't want to burden you. So you can read 100 Superman stories in any order. But I had the only book set in the future. So I own the future. And I thought, well, I'm not going to interfere with anybody. Why not? So I did. My editor, he knew what I was doing, but he didn't mind for the same reason, and also because the book was selling. So,
And so what were some of your inspirations behind some of the newer characters that you brought onto the book?
well, I wanted to have in my first issue that was published, I wanted to have some characters who did more physical things or more visual things. So I created Princess Projectra, who makes illusions, and Karate Kid, and Farrellet, who was strong and almost invulnerable. That's that thing I wanted to do, is because at DC in those days, you were super or you weren't. It was like, you're either Superman strength or there was not a whole lot of people in the middle there. So I wanted to make a guy in the middle who was, pretty hard to hurt, but possible to hurt. And then the other guy was the bad guy. And then after that, I introduced a number of characters, mostly that I did not create. Shadowlass was suggested by a fan. Mort used to have a little column in the part of the letter column saying bits of Legionnaire business, and people would write in suggestions for names of characters and powers. That's about it. So I took it from there, and I created Shadowlass, gave her a background and a personality and everything. There was one or two others like that, I can't remember. But I always tried to have, Stan always had new characters coming in, all new villains all the time. So I tried to do that too. And so doing a pale imitation of Stan, it got me by. My book held its own while every other book at DC was falling, including Superman and Superboy. Legion of Superheroes was selling 500,000 copies a month on my first issue, and it was selling 500,000 copies a month on my last issue. So at least I held my own, didn't raise the sales, but I held my own. And there were statements of ownership, postal statements of ownership, which tell you those things in my first issue and conveniently in my last issue.
And I mean, like you said, you preferred Marvel, as opposed to kind of that stuff. So what did you see at Marvel that DC lacked, besides the fact that you felt like they were kind of, more old timey, I guess you kind of said?
Old fashioned.
Old fashioned, I meant.
And even in the beginning of the 60s, middle 60s, they were very sort of formulaic and repetitive. I mean, like, it just seemed like every issue was all about Lois Lane trying to discover Superman's secret identity. And every Batman was him fighting the Joker or the Penguin on a giant typewriter or toothpaste tube or something. And and they didn't really develop the personalities. I mean, every DC character, his first issue, he already has met the love of his life, and Carol Ferris, Iris West, everybody. They all apparently had good jobs. They never had any financial worries. They all lived in nice places, and the only worry was if the Mirror Master was out there someplace. And that Marvel, Stan developed the characters forward. Like I said, he did continuity. And so in issue 7, Peter Parker remembered meeting the Vulture in issue 2. And on top of that, he developed the characters inward as well as forward. So that was kind of interesting and new and different. And also the characters, Stan would always use the soundbite, heroes with problems, because if you're doing 1,000 interviews, you eventually devolve down into sound bites. And also, and I told him, I said, Stan, it was more than that. It was like heroes with lives. He said to me, try explaining that to the Daily Post. Good point, because they would assume they all had lives, They say, well, what do you mean? And then you'd be on that for half. So I understand what he was doing and why, but to me, it was that the heroes really did have lives, and you cared about them. You wanted to know what happened to not only Spider-Man, but Peter Parker next time.
Yeah, I definitely think as a reader that was not growing up in that era, like going back and reading Silver Age Marvel as well as Silver Age DC, there is a drastic difference in terms
Yeah,
of the way you're reading it.
it was revolutionary, and I never saw anyone launder their costume before. I never saw anyone, Spider-Man's his arm is injured, and one time he has a cold, and the Fantastic Four had their little family struggles, and it was all new, different. I think the first issue of Fantastic Four that I read, that they go back in time and the Thing becomes Blackbeard, and he likes it. He wants to stay there, And of course, he comes to his senses. But to me, it's like, boy, I never saw that in a DC comic book. I see Superman flying around, nobody seems to care. I see him cutting the ribbon at bridge openings and things like that. I don't think it would play that way. If there was some guy flying around, they wouldn't say, "Hey, there's a guy flying around. Let's have him, open up the new bridge."
Yeah.
It would anyway. So I like Marvel better for that reason. And the Marvel comics from that era are a little dated now too,
Yeah.
because I mean that's a long time ago. But I think they hold up pretty well if you take into account the fact that no one has a cell phone and the differences in the slang expressions and stuff like that. I think they hold up really well.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you on that for sure. Especially like it's harder for me to read an old DC comic from that era than it is to read an old Marvel comic, for at least for me. I wanted to ask because like I've always heard about like the way you approach writing, the way you approach the structure of a comic book,
Right.
and how it should have a clear structure. Like, where did you kind of develop that? Where did you learn that from?
Well, I had great teachers. Mort Weisinger taught me a lot. I worked with Stan a long time. I listened to every word he said. I worked with Jack Kirby. I not only listened to what he said, but after we were done talking about whatever story we were talking about, I would ask him questions. Why did you pick this angle? Where were you going with this? How'd you come up with this? And he would always he was really sharp when he was talking shop. He could tell you exactly why he picked that angle. And lots of other guys. Wally Wood, Gil Kane, what an intense guy. Um, Kurt Swan, good storyteller. All of these really great, and also people like Archie Goodman, even people that worked for me. Archie, I mean, you couldn't be in a room 10 minutes and not walk out smarter. He was just really so knowledgeable and so good. Learned from him. I even picked up stuff from some of the other writers, I just try to pay attention. I'm a student of the game. And the person who originally codified what a story was Aristotle. And he wrote a book called The Poetics, where he talked mostly about Greek tragedies, but still he was exploring what is a story, what makes a story, and why do I like this one and don't like that one. And he figured it out pretty well. And then 350 years later, the Roman poet scholar Horace thought he had some ideas to contribute. Big fan of Aristotle's, and he wrote a book called Ars Poetica, and then further carried on. And basically, I'll get a paraphrase here, but basically they define what a story was. It doesn't matter if it has a definition. That doesn't limit you. A sentence has a definition. It's a complete thought. You think that limited, Hemingway or Salinger or J.K. Rowling? No, of course not. It's just a concept. And story is a complete journey. Character starts someplace. Inevitably, something will change to send them on a journey. Eventually, the results of that journey are determined. There'll be conflicts along the way, and eventually those things are resolved, and the character arrives at the end of the story, which should be different than the beginning of the story. It's not a formula. It's a definition. You can do it out of order. You can complicate it up like a Russian novel. You have lots of subplots and supporting characters and so forth. You can have more than one thing disrupt the character and push him along on his journey. I used to call it I used to say Little Miss Muffet. Little Miss Muffet sat on top of eating her curds and whey. Along came a spider, sat down beside her and scared poor Miss Muffet away. Okay, who we got? Little Miss Muffet. What's she doing? Eating lunch. If she doesn't, nothing happens, she'll just finish lunch and go back to work. But along comes a spider And inevitably, almost any story written by a professional writer, there will be a spider. Okay. Sits down beside her. Now we're in that part where there's suspense and conflict. We don't know what's going to happen. Scares poor Miss Muffet. She sees it. This is the moment of truth. This is the climax. Away. She gets away. And she's not going back there for lunch anymore. So if you look at the word any really skilled writer, every television show, every movie, almost all novels, not comics so much, but all these other disciplines, you'll see it. You'll see it. Breaking Bad, he's a poor chemistry teacher. Then he gets a terminal disease. There's your spider. Rocky, he's an aging pug. If nothing else happens, he'll just get old and die. But he gets a shot at the champ. There's your spider. Doesn't have to be a problem. It could be an opportunity. It could be anything. Just something to send you on the journey. And if you start looking for that, you'll see it in every story. And like I say, really good writers, they do it subtly, gracefully, and they'll put in what we call twists, like in Rocky. Rocky, it starts out being the story of a fight, but there's a twist in the middle where he realizes winning is probably not possible. It becomes all about him and his manhood. They think he's a pug. So he decides that since no one else has ever gone the distance, if he does that, that's his goal, right? So it's no longer the story of a fight. It's a story of a fighter. It's much different. And so you can be, do some amazing things. This is a definition. It does not limit you. It didn't limit Hemingway, didn't limit Mark Twain, didn't limit anybody. It's just the definition. And if you can add some insight in the human condition, I'm not talking about morality plays or parables. I'm just talking about, I felt like that, or I never felt that, or you'll, holy cow, that's what would happen there, and blah, blah, blah. If you're a good writer, you start, playing the instrument, and you can do some amazing things.
I love that. Yeah, I never really thought about it that way. But you break it down, Miss Muffet. In that sense, it's crazy to look at it in that light.
Yeah, if you watch some movie or something like that, watch it once for fun, and then watch it with a clicker, and then see if you can pick out, that's the spider. Oh, here's where they're going to introduce a subplot. It's contingent on the main plot, and here are their supporting characters who complicate. Here comes Lenny and Squiggy. They're going to screw things up. Whatever. You'll start to see. Not only, I used to tell people, you want to learn, take Raiders of the Lost Ark or any other great movie that you like, and sit there with a clicker, and every time they move the camera, stop and think about what you just saw. That's more or less a panel in a comic book, with a couple panels. Every time they change scenes, stop and think about the last scene. What did that director and writer show me? Tell me. How did they show me that? And then you'll start learning literary devices. And why? Why'd they show me that? And why do they show you when Indiana Jones at the beginning is recovering an artifact? That's what he does. Stay at the office. He's sitting on his tuffet, and he encounters problems in the course of it. Giant tarantulas do not scare him at all. However, he sees a snake and he's terrified. Write that down. It's going to come up again. And there's no fat on that movie, and there shouldn't be on any. If Indiana Jones was a fabulous ballroom dancer, well, I don't need to know that. I don't care. Well, however, in True Lies, you do need to know that, and so you make sure they show you. So anyway, that it just is. If you sit there with the clicker and watch and just think, how did they show me that? How do they show me that Rocky is getting stronger? Well, when he first goes out to run, he runs up the stairs of the library, and he's exhausted. He's got a stitch in his side, and he just barely makes it, and he just walks down slowly. At the end, he bounds up those stairs. He gets to the top, and he's exulting. He's the giant on the king on the mountain. All right, the guy's stronger. Let's face it. We proved that's called parallel construction, and you can read books on literature, or you can just watch movies and figure it out.
Yeah, I'm definitely going to be analyzing some stuff next time I watch a movie or show or pick up a comic. You had a good thing going to DC. When did you decide to make the move over to Marvel?
Well, I didn't directly. I mean, I finally got to the point with DC. I had this editor named Mort Weisinger, and he was a very smart man, and he taught me an awful lot. Okay, but he was also famously mean. Don't just ask me. I mean, a lot of people will tell you, that he was nastier than he had to be. I don't know why. Okay, but he was. So I finally got, I got over. I stopped letting him hurt my feelings, like when I was fairly young, 14 or so, because I thought, they wouldn't keep sending me these checks if I'm such a moron. They'd call you a moron, they'd call you names. That was just so you didn't ask for a raise. And so I just let it roll off my back. It wears you down. You get tired. And so after 5 years, I said, I was out of high school, and I said, enough. And I got some work first doing advertising stuff, mostly for Lando Bishopric in Pittsburgh. They had the U.S. Steel account. I worked all over the U.S. Steel account. They had, and then later with a company called Foot Cone Building Honig in San Francisco, they had Levi Jeans account, and a bunch of smaller and local companies, and all kinds of things. And I was doing comics style advertising. The guy who called me up to ask me to do my first job for them, he said, "You're the kid who does comics, right?" I said, "Yeah, that's me." So I was mostly doing comics style advertising, and advertising paid really well, but I just didn't like it, because they want me to make an ad to sell Super C steel joists. I said, "What's a joist?" I said, "I don't know." So I'm trying to convince people to buy something I don't even know what it is, and I kind of got tired of that, and I still ended up doing a lot of what they call custom comics for advertising after that. But it was because of the company I was working for at the time. Wasn't like that wasn't my livelihood, or it was part of it, I guess. But at any rate, so I spent a couple of years doing that. Somewhere along the line, Marvel offered me some basically rescue work or fill-in work. Somebody would get like so late on something that they just had to get anybody to do it overnight. And so the first time they called me, and I did it and delivered it regularly, because I was trained at DC, and you don't fail at DC in those days. You deliver, and it better be good. So I got picked up a bunch of those jobs from Marvel, sort of, and you'll see anything that says plotted by somebody else and then written by me. That's one of those jobs, because I didn't need anybody to plot for me, but I'd have to script things that other people plotted but could not, but failed to script. And but then I also started getting work from DC. DC offered me, Mort had gone, and somebody there offered me, somebody I know, Julie Schwartz offered me Superman, and Murray Bolton offered me the Legion of Superheroes again. Both of those had other writers, so it wasn't just me. Carrie Bates, for instance, on Legion, and Carrie on Superman, and Marty Pasco, and Elliot S. Magan, I guess. So anyway, there was I'm getting work from DC, and was doing things for Marvel, and then I got an offer to be an editor at Marvel. Actually, turned out to be the editor, the only one, reporting to the editor-in-chief, who was not, he wasn't a line editor. He wasn't a hands-on guy. And so I took that. I started there in January 1976, which I was, let's see, I guess I was 24.
It's crazy. Yeah, I mean, look, like the stuff that you did under the tenure, whether it was writing books like the Korvac Saga, Secret Wars, I mean, you oversaw Simonson's Thor, Claremont's X-Men, Miller's Daredevil, Byrne on Fantastic Four, Mark Gruenwald's Captain America.
That's later. I mean, when I started, I was just the editor, and for 3 months, Marv Wolfman was the editor. For 3 weeks, Jerry Conway was the editor, and for the rest of the time, it was Archie. And then when I became editor-in-chief, that's when all this stuff you just mentioned happened. We were in bad shape, and I was desperate. But I managed to find really good people, like the ones you just said, and you turned it around.
Yeah, I think what's really great about that era, and I'm kind of jumping ahead of where planned to kind of talk, but is that you could pick up any comic, especially when I was growing up. You could pick up any single comic, and you got a full story. You know what I mean? And I think that that is something that I miss from comics. Don't get me wrong, I love comics. I still read a lot of comics, and I will always love comics. But
Yeah.
I definitely think that even within those runs that I just mentioned, I've gone back and read them multiple times, but each single issue within those runs was a complete story.
Yeah, if you know how to do it right. I mean, in the earlier 70s, and even when I was editor there, that was when I was editor, I started preaching people, this is the definition of the story. These elements should be in here. If they're not, people are going to say, well, what happened after the spider? Or did she get away or not? So I was preaching that even when I was just the editor. I was actually editing the scripts, and the editor-in-chief, not too sure what they were doing, but then when I became in charge, like I said, I was the editor-in-chief, vice president, and I ran the publishing. And I got great people like Larry Hama, tremendous, like Louise Simonson. It's like winning the lottery on Christmas Day. I mean, and Archie Goodman came back, and we had we got all these great guys: Jim Salicrup, Carl Potts, Bob Budiansky's genius. All these great people. So I didn't have to explain a lot. You don't have to tell Larry anything. You don't tell Louise anything, and they know. And Archie can tell you more than you can tell him. So anyway, you got all these people, and they're all sort of on the same page. And can you do a continuous story? Of course you can. And I'll tell you exactly how. There's lots of different ways to go about it. And we did plenty of continued stories. But like you said, we tried to have either a complete story in an issue or enough of a story that it ended in such an interesting way that you just had to have the next issue. And in that next issue, we tried to bring you up to speed so you didn't have to worry about whether you missed the last issue. And I learned some of that from Stan. I mean, he had a way of, people say, oh, you have to explain everything at the beginning. No, you don't. You have to give people enough so they can understand, and they'll pick it up. But you can't leave. There's a difference between mystery and confusion. There's a difference between giving them enough so that they can go ahead and wing it, and just giving them nothing, and then they don't know what's going on. That's what part of what's happened today. I mean, all the characters call each other by their civilian names, I know who Cal is, and I know who Bruce is. For a while I puzzled over who the Carters were, and then I remembered Hawkman, his wife. It's like give them a chance. If you do it right and you do it well, that will be seamlessly incorporated into action at the beginning. And you're on page 3. You already know everything you need to know, but don't feel like you've been sitting through a lecture. Or
Yeah.
I mean, Stan would do it so effortlessly, so gracefully. And I used to have people complain, oh, you got to bring everybody up to speed. And I'd say, yeah, I never told you to do it badly. Do it well. Do it well. And for the most part, we did. Like I said, great editors. And every once in a while, we get a new guy, and I try to help him, or whoever. But mostly I just had the best people who ever were, and boy, they did great stuff.
Yeah, it was an amazing era at Marvel. And most of the people I said, with the exception of like Mark Grunwald, it definitely was a sense of looking back, like you empowering the artists, cartoonists, to be writing their stories as well, which I think prior to that wasn't really seen too much at the big two.
I really like the idea that you'd do a little writing, which is what I did, when I had to, because it keeps your hand in, it keeps you understanding what they're up against. If you just want to manage creative people, well, then you're an expediter and just processing the stuff through. But if you know the problems that a Claremont or somebody's facing, and yes, all of them, everybody, even the best ever, who was Archie, I mean, there's still a lot of work to it, where you have to do some long and hard thinking to come up with ideas and interesting ways to develop those ideas.
And is there anyone over the years that you wish you would have been able to work with that you didn't get a chance to?
Yeah, I mean, I worked with George Perez for a while, and DC offered him the Justice League, and he, in the nicest way, he actually wrote me a 3-page letter, and in the nicest way, he apologized. He said, "But this is my childhood dream." Okay, we wish we had him back. You know, I mean, I said, you know, yeah, follow your heart, but if you ever want to, come back. The other guy that we used to think about that we didn't have, and I thought was just a tremendous artist, was Jose Luis Garcia Lopez, who did most of Disney's model sheets, advertising, and once in a while did a comic, and it always looked great. I think he did the Batman Hulk book. I'm not sure. Anyway, so other than that, I mean, I got to work with almost everybody I wanted to. It's hard to think of somebody we didn't have. We had so many tremendous people.
And how any projects that didn't come to fruition that maybe were kind of close to coming out, but or that just didn't work for any reason?
I ran the publishing. I didn't have to ask anybody. And so I reported to the president of the company. He had never opened a comic book in his life, and he never did. And he was just really he didn't want to. He didn't like, you know, comics, or he didn't care about them or whatever. But for some reason, as long as we were doing well, he just, you know, let me go. And I did pretty much whatever I wanted. The only thing that would happen sometimes is that if you did something that was successful, like Star Wars, you know, then they start, the people upstairs, the bean counters, they say, well, why don't we just do that? The next thing you know, they're deluging you with things that you ought to do. Well, I successfully fended a lot of them off, but every once in a while, one of them would get the president intrigued with something, and then he'd call me, you know, and you know, he's the boss, you know. So I was happy to do Raiders and Star Wars, but you know, when you're doing Krull and I don't know what else, some of these other ones, they were just not likely to do well. They did okay, but you know, and same thing with toys, G.I. Joe, Transformers, sure, super toys. But when they ask you to do Crystar or Stariers or Sectars, no, guys. I mean, but I couldn't fend those. I mean, US1, give me a break. But I couldn't fend them off because the president, somebody, and he didn't really understand what was good or what was bad. He just like something caught his eye, you know, like Rom caught his eye. Rom. The nice thing about Rom was a toy lasted 10 seconds and the book lasted years. Well, and I think because it had nothing to do, the success had nothing to do with the toy. It had to do with, I got good people on it and they did a good job. And it was interesting. It was fun.
Yeah, I think that's important. I mean, you can take, in my opinion, I think you can take any property. If you put the right people on it, you can make a great book.
Yeah. Well, some of this stuff you could if you had time. You only have so many swings of the bat. And so sometimes, a few times we nailed it. And sometimes, you know, we hadn't figured it out yet and it just wasn't working. So,
yeah. I want to know a little bit about, I mean, obviously I've probably heard the story, but I really want to hear it directly from you. But the idea behind Secret Wars, I mean, I believe that's the first major crossover in comics.
As far as I know, yes.
Yeah.
The first company-wide crossover.
Yeah.
Well, it started with Kenner Toys going to DC because they wanted to try a line of superhero action figures. Well, all the toy companies spy on each other. So Mattel heard about this and they just in case superheroes were the next big thing, they wanted to hedge their bets. So we're the only other game in town, really. So they came to us, and first they were talking to our licensing people, and they're saying, "Well, who you got?" You know, and the licensing people who have never opened a comic book are looking down lists and saying, "Oh, I've got Ghost Rider, got Daredevil," and they hadn't even heard of these people. As often happened in such a case, I was summoned to the meeting, and I explained to them, no, we have lots of good characters. And I'm telling them about Thor and Iron Man and so forth. And I also said, we have some, you know, they said, yeah, but DC characters are, everybody in the world knows Batman, Superman, Wonder Woman. I said, yeah, well, there's a couple of our characters that have gotten a lot of exposure too, Spider-Man and Hulk. And they said, yeah, but even those two, you know, just with the TV shows and stuff, that doesn't give them Q scores like DC. Q score is like a measure of the people's awareness of a property or a character or a personality. And I said, no, I said, you're correct. However, in our market where you're going to sell a lot of toys, in the comics market, the direct market and our extended market in the newsstand, I said, we outsell DC about 5-1. And so everyone in that market, which buys a lot of toys, is going to know all about these characters. They said, oh, well, great. Okay, so they agreed to sign the deal. But they asked me, is there anything you could do to get us publicity? I said, how about I publish one giant story, 12 issues, with all the major villains, all the major heroes in one really spectacular epic story. They said, well, that'll be good. I said, all right, deal. And so we made our deal with Mattel. And then now I got to do it, you know. And it was hard, but because I didn't want it to be just something off to the side that doesn't mean anything. I wanted it to be part of Marvel continuity, an essential piece of history. And so I designed it to fall between the December books and the January books. That's where the 12 issues occur in continuity, although they come out, you know, the whole year. And I knew that if you go off to war, you know, you're going to come back changed, either physically or mentally or emotionally or whatever. And so I was trying to work some things that were different into the story. And so this black Spider-Man suit, which had been, the idea of black suit was suggested by a fan. That's it, 2 words. So I thought, yeah, maybe he comes back in a different costume, you know? And that wasn't done a lot then, not with major characters, you know? And I don't know any major character like a Superman or Batman. I don't know. Anyway, maybe it was. But so I knew something about the toy business. And so Spider-Man 252 would come out in January, which was right before Mattel's Toy Fair. Mattel had their own toy fair in addition to the big toy fair everybody has in New York. Mattel was so big they had their own toy fair in Scottsdale, Arizona.
Wow.
In January, and the regular toy fair is in February. So I timed that so that Spider-Man 252 would come out just as their toy fair was about, and people were just about to travel to their toy fair, and it got national publicity, so they were happy. I mean, all 3 wire services, papers all over the country, all 3 New York papers, television, radio. I mean, a lot of people had heard about Secret Wars when they showed up to place their orders from Mattel Toys at the Mattel Toy Fair. So then I also timed issue 8, which is the origin of the black suit, for August. That's when they sell in the Christmas toys. So I you know, you're welcome, guys. I mean, nobody ordered me to do that. Nobody told me anything. I never heard a word from those guys. Yeah, it was, we had no obligation to show them anything for approval, and I wouldn't have agreed to that. And we had, they never asked. They weren't interested. And they just wanted publicity, and we got it for them. And I think our toy outsold Kenner's by a substantial margin. But at any rate, you know, that's how it started. But we were free to do the best book we could do, and we tried. We poured our hearts into it. The only thing that Mattel gave us, and they gave it to us accidentally. I was talking to one of their guys. He was telling me about their focus groups, and he told me that in the focus group related to something entirely different, that the 2 words that the kids responded most to were secret and wars. I said, Secret Wars. It's on another planet. Nobody knows. Okay. So it's a secret. And that you know, that worked pretty well. People seem to like that. So, but that was one of their few contributions.
Yeah, I mean, it's crazy, you know. I mean, that crossover started something that is still going on today with, you know, company crossovers, you know, and events and stuff like that. So it's kind of interesting to see like how it all started and be able to hear it directly from you.
It's become a staple of marketing, except most people do the story off to the side that has nothing to do with any continuity. Anyway.
Yeah. You know, you've talked about Mort Weisinger and, you know, and Stan Lee, and learning from 2 of those great editors and stuff. And like, honestly, it seems so different, you know, compared to how books were edited back then to the way, or lack thereof, they are done today. I was wondering, like, what kind? What's your feeling on that in terms of like editing and seeing editing on books compared to how it was done back then?
Well, you know, you're not hiring authors. You're not, they don't have a free hand. Go work for Disney and try to mess with the mouse. Those characters are franchises and they're properties. And theoretically, the writers and artists agree to come and work for the company that owns those characters. I saw to it that they were very well paid.
Mhm.
And because if it's work for hire, you don't own it, you better be very well paid. And we also had programs where we provided all materials and pay their postage, pay their, you know, airfare, paid phone bill, whatever. And so I tried to make it good work for hire, but it's work for hire. Marvel owns Spider-Man, you don't, you know, and so Marvel had to have a representative to sort of have some governance over this. And the way I looked at it, it wasn't my job to tell them what I wanted in Spider-Man, you better do this. My job was to protect the franchises, try to give them as much, you know, a space to play around in as I could, because you want them to be creative, you know, and not, you know, be micromanaging anything. But you know, to keep them from going off the rails, which I did a few times. Fortunately, I had great editors, and the great editors knew what to do. And in general, we had some pretty great creative people. You know, Walt Simonson, he knows what to do. You don't have to tell him. You know,
Mhm.
if you do, he'll just say, "I know." You know, so you know, people like that. But every once in a while, somebody. I mean, there were things that came up that I had to, you know, decide. Bill Mantlo wanted to have Peter Parker, Spider-Man, father an illegitimate child. And he argued with his editor until he turned blue. And the editor finally says, "Well, talk to Jim." You know, he's like, dumped it on me. And so he comes in and he's arguing with me that he wants to do this story. And I said, "No, Bill, no way." I said, "Spider-Man, we have contracts, licensing contracts, people all over the world that has a clause in it that says we won't do things like that. That's one. Two, it's way out of character. What's wrong with you? Spider-Man's character is the key to Spider-Man is responsibility, because he screwed up once. What's his name? Uncle Ben, and he never will again. Okay, he's a responsible guy, you know. And I said that would be life changing for him and everybody else, and everybody would be burdened with that for the next however long until somebody retconned it. But you know, I said no. Well, he was furious, and he did a scathing interview with a fanzine telling everybody how I was denying him his creative freedom. Well, okay, yes, and I would again every time. But then what fanzine article comes out, and he reads it, and he says, "Oh God, you know, Shooter's going to read this," and I did, and he came in and he presumed he was fired. He says I really need my job back. And I said, "You never lost it. Just don't do this too much, you know." And we had lots of other things. Everybody's heard about the Phoenix saga where Chris was trying to cop out at the ending, and Louise was the new editor. She didn't really know the whole background of the story, and she'd know what Chris was telling her, and Chris was trying to get away with something there. I just said, no. It's got this great story. It's built up to this incredible peak. You can't cop out, you know. And he'll tell you that I forced him to kill Phoenix. No, that was his idea. It's like he was trying to back me down. It's a bluff, I think. He's trying to back me down. And when he said, "I'm gonna kill her," I said, "Deal. You do that right. That's a good ending." And they did it right. I mean, once they realized they had to do it, they did it brilliantly. And I mean, it redeemed her a little bit at the end. It was a really good story, and it shot X-Men from middle of the pack to top of the industry, where it stayed for 20 years. Pretty good.
Yeah, I would say so. You know, like you were editor in chief for 9 years. You know, a lot of stuff happened during your tenure, and I don't know if how closely you follow Marvel, but I was wondering, like, what are your thoughts on current Marvel and stuff?
I think they forgot what business they're in. I think you have to put entertainment first. Stan used to have, you know, social opinions all the time, but he did it the right way. In the first issue where the Black Panther appears, it's not about race. It's hardly mentioned, and it has nothing to do with it. and says, you know, it's this noble guy who's a king, you know, who's fearless and brave and does these remarkable things. That's what it's about, you know, and nobody talks about where he came from or, you know, what color he is. I think that's the way to go. In many, many ways, many, many times, Stan put in many subtle but powerful messages about, but they were the characters' opinions, and they weren't the writer talking at you. They weren't the company talking at you. It was nobody was preaching. It was just, you know, you hoped that to convey something, like Mark Twain did with Huckleberry Finn. If you ask 1,000 people, what's that about? They'll say, oh, it's about two guys floating down the river on a raft. No, it's not. It's about human equality, you know. But it's so entertaining, and the message is, you're not burdened with it, and so that will be delivering the message for 1,000 years.
Yeah, I totally agree. I see where you're going with that stuff, definitely. You know, another thing that I think is huge that I think, you know, I know just from the outside looking in, or maybe I'm assuming it, but like you were all about creators' rights. I know that a lot of that stuff that took place during Marvel, the stuff that you implemented, lasted for quite a bit of time. I don't know if they're still doing it.
I don't even.
Do you think that that might attest to kind of like why in recent years maybe like top talent will like leave to go do create their own stuff as opposed to sticking around with Marvel, as long as, like, you know, I mean, we don't see those runs, right? Like where a creator stays with the character for a long period of time. Do you think there's anything?
Could have something.
Yeah. Do you think there's anything Marvel could do maybe to kind of, in terms of rights?
Start playing fair. I mean, you know, we did for a while. We had the creator online, and I introduced a policy where if you created a new character in a Marvel title, Spider-Man, Fantastic Four, whatever, you signed a document. It was called a character creation contract or something like that. And then you own 20% of the adjusted gross forever for that character. And that came in real handy for Bill Mantlo and his family. You know, Bill was in a bad accident. But then the movie comes out, the Guardians movie with Rocket Raccoon, created by Bill Mantlo during that time. And I guess you know, he got his family got money they needed, and that was good. But I think that, you know, it's yeah, it is sad. We tried to have give them a choice. You know, you can do creative, and we pay you well for it. We're not like most places. They give you some tiny advance, and then you're really running on empty for a while for doing the book, and then praying that it sells enough so you get a royalty. We paid pretty darn good up front, and offered a royalty on top of that. You know, and so you had that option, which, you know, it's like Dreadstar. It's what Starlin wanted to do, and he took a chance, and he did well. Or you might decide to do a regular Marvel comic book, Spider-Man, and then you're guaranteed you're going to do well, and you know, you don't blow it. But anyway, so I don't know. I think they got to rethink a lot of things, because they're editors. I don't think they know what business they're in. They've more or less become expediters. It's become a star system. I don't think anybody would dare tell Michael or something rather Bendis, whatever his name is. I can never remember that guy's name. What is his name?
Brian Michael Bendis.
All right, that guy. Then nobody's going to tell him, no, you can't do this. You know, he does whatever he wants. Same with what's that guy at DC? Jeff Johns, yeah. Yeah. I mean, you know, they just process this stuff through, and nobody's training him. You worked for Larry Hama, and you know, you needed some training. He'd train you. You know, if you work with Walt, fine, let him go. He knows. But if you're like a newer guy, you talk to Jeff Isherwood about Larry Hama. The first job he did for Marvel was for Larry Hama. And he brought in layouts, and Larry put tissue papers on top of all of them. And he said, this is what you need to do here. This is what you need to do here. He learned more in a couple hours with Larry than he did in art school, you know? So, you know, and Archie, like I said, he's so good. And you know, and Denny O'Neil, he wasn't so good with the art. He wasn't a guy who cared too much about art. But fortunately, he had John Romita Sr., the art director, and he could go to him and, you know, confer with John over that. And some other people too. Larry would help anybody, but, you know, and some of the guys were really good with art. But at any rate, you know, they would train you. And Denny did a lot of work with Frank Miller. I mean, Denny was kind of getting to the end of it with comics, but what really perked him up is when we got this newfangled kid, Frank Miller. It just energized, and he was, he I think he ended up teaching Frank more than a few tricks, and I worked with him too. But that's what we did. We tried to you just didn't assume that the guy who walks in the door already knows everything. You find out what he knows, and you help him where he needs it, or her.
One more thing about DC, because I want to get like your opinion, like as from an editor-in-chief standpoint. DC, a lot of the argument, I'll be honest with you, I love DC Comics, but this is one argument I have. There's so much Batman, too much Batman, and it's like we don't like when you got into comics, when you were reading, when you were writing them, like DC has such a wide, vast amount of characters, so many different, like Green Arrow, Legion of Superheroes, Ragman, Creeper, stuff like that, and you just don't see those kind of books being published today. How would you like kind of answer that in terms of like why we don't see more stuff like that? What can they do to make those more appealing to an audience?
Well, Batman has because of the movies and stuff, and because they really did have some very, very good creators on Batman many times along the way. Neil, Denny, lots of people. But so it became kind of that it's famous because it's famous. It became kind of their uncontested slam dunk. They could always count on other Batman miniseries with a #1 in it. They're going to sell some copies, and that's fine. So it's the easy thing to do. It's harder. I mean, sometimes the bean counters upstairs at Marvel would say, well, the X-Men sells, why don't we do more X-Men books? And I would say, because we want to keep this one good. The guy can only do so much, and we're not. I'm going to try to make the Avengers sell like the X-Men. That's my plan, and we were making a lot of money. So I mean, really, other than whine at me sometimes, these guys couldn't make me do anything. Some could talk to the president sometimes and convince him, of things, but basically, I just didn't want to do that. The reason we ended up having New Mutants and X Factor was not because of pressure from upstairs. It was from pressure from below. When Claremont comes in your office and he's got an artist in tow, and he says, we want to do this book called New Mutants. I'm getting it from both sides, and like, I want to please Chris. I want to, he was great. He was a mainstay, and I just wanted to, entertain his whims as much as I could. But so we got that done, and then we got X Factor came along. I thought that was really the limit, man. When I left Marvel, not too long after that, when I was at Valiant, Marvel had 14 monthly X-Men books, 14, and I thought it's too thin. Some of these aren't good, and you're running the characters into the ground, especially with Batman, because he's only one guy, and so I think that you're right, way too much Batman, because it's low-hanging fruit. That's what they want. They have no idea how to make some of these other books sell that well. They think maybe it's the movies or something, and they're wrong. You look at X-Men, there's no movie. Chris and John and Dave Cockrum, who created the new X-Men, don't believe anybody else. All of these people, really did something wonderful there, and it succeeded because it ought to. And then you look at the other books that succeeded because they ought to. Daredevil, it was our #2 book when Miller was doing it. I think it maintained that for a long time. It was, make it good, care about it, and then let the chips fall. And if you really resonate with the audience, maybe you'll have another X-Men. Maybe you'll have another Daredevil. Maybe. We sure had a lot of. We had Star Wars, but that was easy. See, that's the slam dunk.
Mm-hmm.
And we did eventually we did a Star comic, with droids and stuff like that. But I mean, we tried not to run that into the ground either. I think Lucas, they might have allowed us to do more. But I had the A team on that book. I had Archie Goodwin writing it, and then he was editing it. And he had trained Mary Jo Duffy, and she was writing. Boy, Archie Goodwin trains you. You walk away very well trained.
Well, in terms of like, so like you said, like after you leave Marvel, you start Valiant. So I kind of was curious, what was the experience like, as opposed to working with Marvel and DC, kind of shepherding this Valiant universe, and then in turn, when you leave Valiant and you do Defiant, what are the differences with those companies as opposed to working with?
Well, after I left Marvel, I worked did some freelance stuff. Then I worked for Disney for almost a year. And the whole time I was, I tried to buy Marvel. In 1988, I tried to buy Marvel. I put together financing. We probably could have gone as high as $115 million. There was an auction. There were 9 bidders who qualified to be in the final phase of the auction, and we were one. And we were the only bid. We were the only bid. We bid $81 million because their threshold was 80. And see, it doesn't make any sense to bid at all, because what they always do is a thing called ratcheting. As long as you make the cut, as long as you're over their threshold, they'll try to pit one buyer against another and just try to ratchet the price up. We were not given an opportunity to ratchet because the guy who bought it was Ronald Perlman, who was an insider at the selling company. But without all the technical complications, he needed an arm's length bid so that he could buy it, and that's it. So they just treated ours like an arm's length bid, and he took it. Anyway, so all right, that though got me interested in things like, and educated somewhat in things like raising money and making business plans for a company and all that. So we decided, my 2 partners from the Marvel thing, we decided to try to do a startup. That's the hardest thing in the world. Raising vast amounts of money to purchase something is easy compared to raising a little bit of money to start something. But we found somebody, and it was contingent upon, I told them I could get the gold key characters, because nobody wants to do startup. If you have something that already existed, it gives you some equity, then it gives you more clout with him. Well, I knew Richard Bernstein from him trying to buy Marvel once, and went to him, and he agreed to hold the characters for me because he liked me. He thought I was good at what I did. And so when I finally raised the money contingent on that license, I went and saw Richard and I said, I'm ready. And he it was so funny. He told his licensing guy, he says, Pfizer's, make a deal with this guy. And Pfizer says, deal about what? And he says, just do what he says. So I named my own deal. It was fair. Not a lot of upfront, but very rich back end. So if we win, we all win. And so Pfizer says, okay, that's the deal, And so away we went. I did raise the money from this venture capital company. It's called Triumph. And we started. And it was on a shoestring because it wasn't a lot of money. So $1,125,000. That's very low. That's a very short runway. Mm-hmm. And but we started, and I was working on the superhero stuff. And then I found out that my partner was dating the banker who put up the money. And suddenly he becomes her partner, not mine. And of course, they, between them, had enough stock to control the board. So it's his company, not my company. He was a lawyer. He was on retainer representing Nintendo for media and entertainment. So he made a deal with himself, and all of a sudden I'm doing Nintendo books, and he gets a big fat fee. We do our best. My plan was I'll try to make these things work. If I can make just a little money, I could raise money and buy this turkey out. But that was not likely to work, and it didn't. And guess who else he represented? World Wrestling Federation. So I'm doing wrestling books. Same theory. Try to make it work. Then he ran out of clients, and I finally got to do my superheroes, including Magnus and Solar and Turok. But and then those took off, and within 1 year of publishing those books, we had taken a 17% market share. A lot of it came out of Marvel's hide. That's why they don't like me. But my evil, greedy partner and his evil, greedy wife, they wanted to sell the company on some terms that were pretty bad for me. I wouldn't go along with it. They wanted me to sign a 10-year employment contract, and it didn't specify a title, a salary, or duties.
That's weird.
Who's going to sign that?
Yeah.
You could be, cleaning toilets. Anyway, so but I think they had a bidder, Paramount. They were bidding $250 million for a 1-year-old startup. That didn't work out. So they fired me, and they tried to pretend other people did everything. Paramount was wise to that, and they pulled out. They said, creative guy's gone. So they did sell it to Acclaim Entertainment, but it was for stock, and the stock had to be vested over 5 years, and the stock plummeted, and they went out of business in 2 years, so it was no big deal. All right, so what do? I start another company, and I call it Defiant. And and then we were doing pretty well at the beginning. We started with a trading card license, and we did a set of trading cards. It's sold spectacularly. We only got a little royalty for that. The trading card company made all the money. Mm-hmm. Trading card company was owned by the people who financed us. That's why they wanted us to do it. And then Marvel sues us, claiming that the name of the trading card, Plasm, which was going to be our first comic book, was too similar to a name that they had registered with intent to use in the UK. All you technical people know what that means. But I mean, basically all they have is a name. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't even registered in this country. That's why it didn't turn up in my search. And if it had, it wouldn't have bothered me anyway. Because my book was called Plasm, and theirs was a character called Plasmer.
Yeah.
I said, Terry Stewart, you have a Black Knight. DC has a Black Knight. I said, you have Wonder Man. They've got Wonder Woman. You've got Power Man. They've got Power Girl. Don't tell me this is too close. Oh no, Jim, we'll have to sue you. So they're what trying to do is put me out of business before I could eat up their market share again. Long story short, they succeeded because it cost me $300,000 to win that lawsuit, and we won it slam dunk, man. My little tough Irish lady lawyer just kicked the butts of these 6 Marvel lawyers. But the trial took so long that we missed our window for a toy deal. I had a $9 million guarantee from Mattel, but it had to be. We had to begin the work on it by a certain date. Well, we missed our date, so they killed a $9 million guarantee. That's just the guarantee. The royalty could be much higher. Mm-hmm. And Jill Barat assured me that it would be. She said, "This is a drop in the bucket." I said, "Oh, great." So anyway, they got their wish. They put us out of business with the legal actions, and the judge lectured them after the trial. He called the Marvel attorneys up to the bench, and he said, "You ever use my court as a business weapon again, you will regret it. You will not appeal. You will withdraw the suit, or you will really regret it." And they withdrew the suit. Yes, sir. And but they've done the damage they needed to do, and that was that. But my motto at Valiant was just don't quit. So Lorne Michaels and his president of his entertainment operation called me up, and they wanted to start a comic book company. Well, the market's really tanking. Sure, they didn't care. They thought if we could just sell enough to pay the light bill, what they wanted was movie properties. And so we started working for them. We were doing pretty good, actually. We kind of turned the corner, started making money. Then Lorne, for some reason, he was a general partner. We were 50-50, but he was the general partner. And so he decided to sell us and all of his other entertainment properties. Actually, he decided to sell his other entertainment properties, and we were included. Let's just put it that way. And he sold it to Golden Books Family Entertainment. What they really wanted was they wanted ownership of Lassie and the Lone Ranger. And the rest of us were just along for the ride. And they, first of all, they told me they didn't want to be in the comic book business. The CEO told me, he said, "I don't want to be in this business." On top of that, they quickly went bankrupt, so it didn't matter anything. So since then, I've been freelance.
Yeah, comic book industry is a crazy industry, man. There's so many ups and downs and so many twists and turns, and it's like that's a perfect example of just like what you just in those short amount of years, you leave Marvel, you have Valiant, you have Defiant, and then working with Lorne Michaels, which is pretty cool. But so I was wondering, I'm kind of curious. Like I know you've been working freelance, and you obviously revisited Legion. I think it was in maybe '07 or '09,
Something like that.
something
It
like that.
was
Yeah.
2000, between 2005 and 2009, somewhere there,
Yeah.
I guess.
So any chance of ever revisiting Legion again? You got any more Legion stories in you?
Oh, they don't want me. I'll tell you. At one time, when I was between engagements, I called up Paul Levitz, who at that time was the president and publisher of DC Comics. And I said, I have a proposition for you. He said, what's that? I said, it'll be a series of, you can pick the length. It could be 8 or 10 or 12 books. We're going to call it Jim Shooter's last Legion story, right? He said it won't interfere with anybody's continuity. It'll be set in the time when I was there, right? And this, the end of the 60s. And I'll just do one last Legion story, and it'll be as big as I can make it. And so he said, deal. All right, we're doing it. And I said, all right. He says, look, I have some business to do about that. He said, so let's talk on Monday. It was Friday, I think. He said, think about what artists you want. He's talking about, putting the pieces in place. I said, oh, okay. So I did get no call Monday, Tuesday, I think Wednesday or so. I called him, and he said that on Monday they do so many things by committee at DC. It's so crazy that he went into the committee to tell them that they were going to be publishing this story, and it was shouted down. People didn't want me there. And all right, what do I ever do to you? Well, 2 of them I actually fired. So I fired Denny O'Neil and Mike Carlin from Marvel. So I guess say they were the cheerleaders. But so Paul called me up, or I called him up. He said, look, he said, if the other guys all hate this, he says it's going to be more trouble than it's worth. I said, all right, fine. And I even considered talking to Casada about Jim Shooter's last Avenger story, but I thought, I had by that time I had other things to do. So I came out fine.
Well, I'd love to read those stories definitely. Is there any creators or books that you are kind of digging right now that you're following?
Mostly it's indie stuff, and some of it, is a little rough around the edges, but that's where all the sort of the energy is. That's where, people are doing interesting stuff, and sometimes they could use Larry Hama to show them how. But so I've been reading stuff that Eric Stevenson sends me. He's the head guy at Image. Read some really good stuff, and I think most people already know about this, like Saga, which is really good. One that he wrote is called Nowhere Men. He sent me a stack of them. So I'm reading that stuff, and then every once in a while I'll read some of this indie stuff that people give me, and some of it's pretty good. Some of it's really on the money. There's a guy named Michael Watkins. He started years ago, but he was flying by the seat of his pants. And he's getting to the point. He eventually did some Star Wars and Star Wars covers and some Transformer books and stuff. So he's had a little bit of a taste of the big stuff. And now he's like trying to take some of the properties he worked on early on and redevelop them now that he's older and wiser. And I got to know him. He was at a couple conventions, and for some reason, it was sitting next to me. So we got to talking. His head's in the right place. And he has a series called Guardians, which he did years ago, and he wants to, take another swing at it. Did pretty good years ago, actually. Mm-hmm. That was, of course, the market was better. But so I'm gonna work with him. I'm gonna write one issue and help him, figure out where to go. But that's good. And I liked what I read of his stuff, and he's like-minded. I mean, he's all about tell a story, tell it well, make it count. So there's that, and what other? I don't know. I read a lot of indie books, and I'll read one and then more. Oh, I'll tell you another one I recommend. Ted. Doesn't matter. The name of the book is Tap Dance Killer. And that, as weird as that title is, the guy knows what he's doing. He's doing pretty well. So I recommend that, and he has other books that go with it. I can't remember the titles of right now, but I read some of his stuff and was impressed. And so you know, but that's the fun thing now. You go and you fish around, and you know, somebody cover looks good, and try it.
Mhm.
It might be the next big thing, you know.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of good stuff coming out on the indie scene.
Well, look at Ninja Turtles. Look at Ninja Turtles back in my day.
Mhm.
It was just another one of these little indie books, and look at it now.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah, it's crazy how, I mean, yeah, you never know what's gonna pop off, definitely. Before I let you go, I just wanted to ask, what are you currently working on? Are you hitting the convention circuit now that the pandemic has kind of like reopened most of the conventions? What do you have in the works?
well, I do conventions, and I you know, I get offered more than I can do. And last year I actually did more than I should have. Trying to tamp it down a little bit this year because I have lots of other work to do. And I just came from the Nova convention in Washington. I know JD Sutphin who runs it, and he wants me at his shows, and so I go there. And before that, I was at Cleveland Fan Expo and MegaCon. Oh, that was big. Hall of Heroes in South Bend, Indiana. That's a great show. You'd be surprised. At South Bend, you think, South Bend, it was tremendous. Anyway, so I'm doing a few, and meanwhile, real work that everybody's badgering me to get finished is I'm doing stuff for some Hollywood stuff, uh, streaming series stuff,
Okay.
which I'm not allowed to talk about, but it's fun. I'm working with some amazing, talented people, a director, a producer, a production company, a streaming service, and I mean, they pay me. Go figure. So that's fun. It's hard, but it's fun. At this age, I've done a little bit of. I've written screenplays. I've written stuff, and for one reason or another, I never went there. But at least it was practice for what I'm doing now. So we'll see. I don't know. I never count anything until I see it on the screen.
Okay. Well, I hope we got some comics from you sometime in the future too, because I'd love to see some more.
Well, like I say, I'm going to do with this this one strip Guardians and do some work on that, and trying to think of the name of the company that does it. I don't know. You look it up, you'll find it.
Oh,
Guardians. Michael Watkins. Anyway, nice stuff, and I might do more if I have time.
all right, cool. Well, I just want to, again, I thank you at the top of the episode. Thank you again so much for taking time to chat with me. It has been an absolute pleasure. And I'll definitely hopefully I can meet you at a con sometime in the future. Maybe we can do another one of these chats again sometime soon.
Yeah, anytime you need me.
All right, man. Well, thank
Okay.
you again. Take care.
Thank you. Yeah, you be well.